also increase the volume at our end. But you're audible.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, that was loud. That was loud enough. Dr. Vidyarthi, because we are unable to hear you, although you've asked, you typed in the chat whether we can hear you, but we can't hear you. Can you speak, sir? No, we can't hear you. Paran, are you able to hear Dr. Vikas? No. Can you increase your input set sound on your system, Dr. Vikas? You're able to hear us, but we can't hear you. You're unmute, but we still can't hear you. Can you speak? Can you try speaking? Then we can check if we can hear you, Dr. Vikas.
So maybe you can
Yes.
try changing your input device, like in the phone button you see at the bottom, because you're wearing earphones. If you click on that, you may see what is the input device selected. So you may have to select the name of that earphone. Then that will get chosen as the input device.
It's also possible, since he's on two devices, he's connected his headset to the device which is not mute, which is mute. That is also possible.
Yeah, that's also possible.
Maybe you should
mobile...
just connect to the other device. Yeah, he's on the mobile and on the computer. I hope the headset is he's connected his device, hearing device to the computer. I think Amit is trying to talk to him.
Yeah.
It's 4:29, so I think maybe with Paran, I think in another couple of minutes we should start. But if Dr. Vikas can test his, what about the other two, Ashish and Jaimanti? I don't know that they've tested their mics too.
Yeah, this is Ashish. I can hear you all. I hope.
Oh, great. Yes, your voice is very clear. Jaimanti is, I think, not fully. I can see her, but I think her audio setting is not, will not allow her to talk, I think. So can you just check with her if it's possible? I can see that she is logged in. Okay. Or Amit can call her also. Dr. Vikas, will you try and speak? Maybe we can see if we can hear you. Dr. Vikas? Hello, Dr. Vidyarthi Vikas, can you speak up? Maybe he can't hear us. Dr. Vikas, are you able to hear me? Dr. Vikas, आपको मेरी आवाज सुनाई दे रही है? Amit, will you just call and check with both Dr. Vikas and with Jaimanti? And I think we can start now. If Paran can start off, it's 4:31 now, so I think we can start off. But Amit, will you just check with both of them? Okay, thanks, Amit. Paran, I think we can start.
All right.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I think Amit can check with both of them. Yeah, over to you, Paran. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening to everyone who has joined. My name is Paran, and I shall be moderating the session for today. I welcome everyone who has taken the time out to join us. Today's discussion has been organized on a survey report released earlier this month called Where Are the Kids? Bachche Kahan Hain? The report highlights the worrying situation of government schools in Bihar, focusing on Araria and Katihar districts of northern Bihar. You must be able to view the structure of the discussion on your screen right now, but broadly speaking, we shall have a presentation of the report findings, followed by comments by our panelists, and finally open the floor for questions and comments from the participants. You should be able to see a public chat option on the top left. आपकी अगर लैपटॉप से आप लोग जुड़े हैं तो ऊपर बाएं तरफ आपको option मिलेगा for public chat, and if you've joined from your phone, then you can click on the human like icon on the top left, and you'll see the option there. You can use this place to type in your questions and comments during the discussion. Other than that, I would recommend the participants to keep themselves muted before the Q&A session. I would like to briefly introduce the members of our panel today. John Drèze, who is a development economist and visiting professor at Ranchi University. Dr. Sajitha Bashir, core member of NCEE, who has recently retired from the World Bank. Dr. Vidyarthi Vikas, assistant professor of economics at A.N. Sinha Institute of Social Studies, Patna, Bihar. Ashish Ranjan, secretary of Jan Jagran Shakti Sangathan, which is a trade union of unorganized sector workers in Bihar. The survey was conducted by student volunteers from JJSS under Ashish's guidance. Jaimanti Kumari, youth leader and community organizer from JJSS, and myself, I am Paran, and I work as a researcher in Jharkhand, studying the public schooling system. तो अब हम लोग शुरू करते हैं. मैं कोशिश करूँगी कि मैं हिंदी और अंग्रेज़ी दोनों में बातचीत कर सकूँ. So, where are the kids? बच्चे कहाँ हैं? The curious case of government schools in Bihar. So, in February of 2023, a survey was conducted in 81 primary and upper primary schools, government schools in Katihar and Araria district of Bihar. 81 सरकारी प्राथमिक और माध्यमिक स्कूलों में ये सर्वे किया गया था जन जागरण शक्ति संगठन के स्टूडेंट वॉलंटियर्स द्वारा. तो इस सर्वे की जो फाइंडिंग्स थी वो एक रिपोर्ट में रिलीज हुई थी इस महीने की शुरुआत में, एंड दोज फाइंडिंग्स वी विल डिस्कस टुडे ड्यूरिंग दिस presentation. So the first finding was that there was a severe shortage of teachers. 2/3 of primary schools and nearly all upper primary schools had a pupil-teacher ratio above 30. Right to Education Act says that schools should have one teacher for every 30 students, but most of the schools that we surveyed were not following this basic rule. Teacher attendance was quite low, 63% in.
जिंदाबाद. आवाज आ रही मेरी?
आ रही है. Thank you, Jaimanti ji. Thank you.
So, teacher attendance was quite low, 63% in primary schools and only 55% in upper primary schools. Further, अगर आप ये देखें कि जो RTE का PTR का जो मानदंड है अगर उसको फॉलो करें schools, तो we found that there were only 67% teachers in as required as per RTE in the primary schools and only 41% teachers in upper primary schools. So the second finding was that there were abysmal attendance and there was routine over-reporting happening. Student surveyors barely found only 20% students actually in the school on the day of the survey, and the registers also showed inflated attendance figures. The third finding was that there had been a severe effect of the pandemic. We asked a very simple question to the teachers that post COVID lockdown के बाद जब स्कूल खुले तो had most students from classes 3 to 5 forgotten to read and write. कोविड लॉकडाउन के ख़त्म होने के बाद जब स्कूल जनवरी 2022 में खुले तो क्या ज़्यादातर बच्चे कक्षा 3 से 5 के पढ़ना लिखना भूल गए थे. तो सर्वे के दौरान ये पता चला दैट मोस्ट स्कूल्स हैव रिपोर्टेड कि हाँ बच्चे पढ़ना लिखना भूल गए हैं. इसके साथ क्योंकि डीबीटी बिकॉज डीबीटी हैज़ बीन क्वाइट अ problem in Bihar, especially in terms of the schools, So students did not also have textbooks. We will talk in detail about this ahead in the presentation. But since the school students also did not have textbooks, while they were sitting at home, they did not know how to actually study, even if they wanted to study on their own. Schools were without infrastructure. 0% primary schools and only 22% upper primary schools had electricity, water, and toilets. All three. All three of these things are basic requirements that a school should have, but they were fairly missing from most schools that we surveyed. 16% primary schools and 40% upper primary schools had toilets in good conditions. केवल 16% ही प्राथमिक विद्यालय और 40% उच्च प्राथमिक विद्यालय के पास ऐसे बाथरूम थे जिनको इस्तेमाल किया जा सकता था. Shortage of teachers, shortage of tables and chairs have caused children to do veranda classes. बच्चे बाहर वरांडा में बैठकर classes अपनी attend कर रहे थे. Playgrounds, boundary walls, drinking water facility, cooking sheds, libraries were often not found at schools. खेल मैदान, चार दीवारी, पीने की फैसिलिटी, पानी पीने की फैसिलिटी स्कूल में या कुकिंग शेड या लाइब्रेरी, ये भी चीज़ें स्कूल में नहीं मिलती थी. In this photograph, you can see there's a locked washroom. There's a small green lock that you can see on that toilet. This was the condition of most schools that were surveyed. This is one of the most extreme case study that we found during the survey. This is a primary school in Rishidev Tola. Rishidev is a subcaste amongst Dalit community. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And this school is a primary school which has 150 students on its enrollment. And this is a school building. This is not an exaggeration at all. Apart from this, there is a broken cooking shed and a dysfunctional washroom on the same field. When the surveyors actually went to visit the school, they found cows and other animals grazing the fields in the campus. And but the locals were quite confidently saying that no students come and study here. I would request people to do look at this case study in the report. It's very elaborative and it shows how dismal the conditions are. These are some pictures which will show you how students are studying in the veranda. If there are no tables, there are no chairs, there's no electricity, जिसमें light भी on हो सके, तो you tend to study outside in the open area. Missing potential of midday meals. In some of the schools, we found photographs of local gurus who are known to oppose eggs in the midday meals. There has been a mismatch with regards to the price set by the government for eggs and the rate of the egg in the market. So, Bihar Sarkar gives up sanctions about 5 rupees per egg, and the rate of the egg in the market is about 7 rupees. So this was something that was flagged by teachers that this is as problematic in terms of getting eggs for students. Some schools are actually cooking the midday meal on their own campus, while others are sourcing it from a local NGO. And midday meals are unfortunately considered to be a headache by teachers instead of them realizing the importance that this meal gives to the students. This is a photograph which will show you that this is a local guru, and in some of these schools, a same life-size photograph of these and different gurus were found in the cooking shed where the midday meal is actually made. Dangers of DBT. So, from 2017 academic year to 2022 academic year, which finished in March of 2023, Bihar government was using direct benefit transfer to the direct benefit transfer system for textbooks and uniforms, and this has been a complete failure on their part. Students' time has completely gotten wasted. Either the money transferred has not been able to reach the student's bank account or their parents' bank account, or the money, if reached, has been spent in some other expense. During our survey, we found that most students were coming to school without books or uniforms. ज़्यादातर बच्चे स्कूल बिना किताब या यूनिफॉर्म के आ रहे थे. Bihar government's MedhaSoft portal actually shows that there are about 10,000 rejected accounts in the 11 blocks that were surveyed in these two districts. From this year onwards, DBT has been removed for books, but it continues for uniforms. Schools without buildings. So 7% of all government schools in Bihar do not have a building of their own. उनका खुद का भवन नहीं है. This information was released through an RTI query in January 2023. 9% schools of our sample also did not have their own building. Usually, such schools run from a nearby government office or a neighboring school. Sometimes these schools also depend on the teachers at the neighboring school. उनके खुद के teachers नहीं होते हैं, तो neighboring school वाले teachers ही उनको पढ़ाते हैं. 120 such building-less schools are actually in Patna district itself. This is a photograph of a school which does not have its own building. As you can see, the board of the school is there. The library is also is visible in the photograph. There's also a dustbin on the right corner. Private tuition centers have capitalized on the substandard state of government schools in Bihar. Students, and often their parents as well, rely on these centers for their learning needs. Schools have been reduced to conducting examinations and providing a midday meal to students. So Bihar's government schools are actually not meeting the RTE norms in various ways, and this is causing multiple hurdles for the children in Bihar to access quality education. It is possible, although, to have good schools in Bihar, as was shown in one of our case studies, UMS Chargaria. And with this, I would like to stop my presentation and pass on the baton to John. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. There is a storm brewing here, so I apologize if there's some background noise. The report that Paran has just presented very well is a follow-up to a similar report that was prepared last year for Jharkhand. And for both Jharkhand and Bihar, I think that the basic issues are very similar. The basic issue is that the schooling system is like a ship without rudder. There's a pervasive lack of seriousness and earnestness across the board. The basics are missing, and the Right to Education Act is being flouted left, right, and center. Secondly, this situation, which is really catastrophic for both states. I mean, as it is, they have been more or less reduced to reserve armies of unskilled labor for other states like Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and so on. But on top of that, their future and the future of the children, the well-being and the rights and interests of the children are being compromised by this completely dysfunctional schooling system. But what makes things worse is that there's very little attention being paid to this, very little public concern, very little agitation, protest, action, all that is grossly missing, reflecting the fact that these underprivileged families and their children really don't count for very much at all, in particular in the political system. And what we are seeing also in both states is the disastrous effects of the COVID-19 crisis, where when all these problems were magnified, the schools were closed for the best of 2 years for no convincing reason, mainly because the privileged families were more concerned about the health of their children, and their children were studying online in the comfort of their homes. There was overwhelming reliance on online learning, which was more or less useless for poor children. And when the schools finally reopened after 2 years, very little was done to help the children who had been affected by the crisis. So these are the basic parameters. There are, however, some special problems in Bihar that come out very starkly in this report. The main one, which is conveyed in the title of the report, Where Are the Kids?, is the fact that the school attendance rates are so low, barely 20% at the primary and upper primary level. So just to clarify, what this means is that among the children who were enrolled in these 81 sample schools, barely 20% were present at the time of the survey. Now, this is unprecedented. I've never seen such low school attendance rates. In the Jharkhand survey last year, the school attendance rates were more like 40 or 50%. I thought that was really bad enough. I was quite shocked when we found that. But in Bihar, it's even less, 20%, which means that the schooling system has been reduced to a kind of empty shell. Interestingly, when we presented these findings in Patna earlier this month, there was not much surprise. Nobody questioned these figures. Some people, of course, didn't expect them to be so low, but nobody was particularly surprised. And in fact, one college teacher who was attending said that, look, this is not just in the primary schools, it's across the schooling system. And in my college also, the practice is not to attend classes. And that's the way the system is. So I think this is really a serious issue in Bihar, and it's basically a political and social problem that only the Biharis can solve, because it's not a matter of tweaking a policy here and there. It's a matter of addressing this comprehensive dysfunctionality. Now, the question, of course, is why are the school attendance rates so low at the primary level? I don't think we have a clear answer to that. And I think one of the most important and urgent things to do is to try to understand better why it is like this. We gave some possible reasons on page 12 of the report, just to recapitulate them very briefly. One, of course, is the effect of private tuitions. Many children attend private tuitions, and in many schools it was found that after the midday meals, children go away to attend private tuitions. That certainly has to be a factor, but I don't think it can be the only factor by any means, because from the data that we have, and I think that Sajitha will present some data on private tuitions in Bihar, it's still only a minority of children, even in Bihar, in the government schools, who are attending private tuitions. So it really can't be just that. By the way, quite recently, the Bihar government has banned private tuitions during school hours, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think it's a bad step to take, and hopefully it will help. Secondly, of course, is the discouragement effect of dysfunctional schools. I mean, if there's nothing going on in the schools, why should the children go there? Thirdly, very importantly, I think the effect of COVID. I mean, I can't imagine that the schools could have been closed for a full 2 years at a stretch without that having an impact on children's school-going habits. There was some resistance in Patna in acknowledging that, but I think that this has to be part of the explanation. And in fact, Vikas, Vidyarthi, who is going to speak later, had done a survey before COVID, which also had school attendance data, and they had found higher attendance rates at that time, more like 40%, which is still not very high, but certainly a lot better than 20%. A fourth factor could be inflation of enrollment. It's possible that there is some nominal enrollment of children who put their names on the government school registers, perhaps to get some of the incentives, but are actually attending private schools. A fifth factor, which I'll discuss a little bit more in a minute, is this awful DBT system for books and uniforms, which has the effect that many children don't have books or uniforms, and that must also discourage them from going to school. And one more factor, which is not mentioned in the report, but I think we have to also think about it, is simply the fact that going to school is yet to become a habit in Bihar. I think in many other states now, most parents take it for granted that a child goes to school. In fact, I remember way back in the 1990s, when we were doing the probe survey, and in states like Himachal Pradesh, which were already way ahead of other states in terms of primary education, when we asked parents there, you know, why are you sending your children to school? They could barely understand the question. They said, look, children go to school, that's what children do. I don't think in Bihar that widely shared social norm has been established, so there's still a long way to go there. It seems that many families feel I'm sorry, there's a barking dog here. So I think the habit of going to school is yet to be properly developed in Bihar. Now, a few words about this DBT system. So the DBT system is a system where instead of distributing books and uniforms to children, money is being sent to their bank accounts so that they can buy books and uniforms. This is a very ill-advised system. We had warned against it actually a few years ago when it was initiated in Bihar, it imposes a cruel choice on families between buying textbooks or uniforms or buying other necessities for the household. It's also incidentally illegal because it relies on the Aadhaar payment system, and Supreme Court orders make it very clear that you cannot make Aadhaar compulsory for children. The outcome of the system is quite predictable, that some children have textbooks and uniforms and some don't. And that completely defeats the purpose and is completely unacceptable. It's not acceptable for some children to have textbooks and not others. And the purpose of uniforms, especially, is completely defeated when some children have uniforms and others don't, because the purpose of uniform is to ensure some uniformity or at least an appearance of equality among the children in the school. And when some children have uniforms and others don't, that defeats the purpose entirely. Fortunately, as I said, the DBT for, I'm not sure I've said it actually, but I'm saying it now. The DBT system for textbooks has been discontinued now very recently in Bihar, but it continues for uniforms, and it is also being introduced for uniforms in other states, including Jharkhand and I think other states as well. So there's a danger that this system will spread, and I think the Bihar experience is a very important warning of the possible results. Guru, how much time do I have?
You can take another 7 minutes.
Okay, no, I don't need 7 minutes, but I felt I should say a few words about where we go from here. Well, I think the first and biggest step, obviously, is to shake the apathy that is surrounding all these issues and the deafening silence that is surrounding the schooling crisis. The apathy begins at the top. We had a bitter taste of that on the day of the release in Patna on the 4th of August, when we went to meet the education minister, Professor Yadav, who incidentally is apparently, according to media reports, himself a bit of a fake professor who has not given classes for the last 15 years, despite drawing a full-time salary. But let's leave that aside. But more importantly, he had no sense of urgency, and he was clearly disconnected from the realities of poor families. For example, when we suggested that Bihar could introduce eggs 3 times a day in the midday meals instead of just once, partly to improve the nutrition of children and partly to raise the school attendance levels, he said that if it was up to him, there would be no school meal at all. And he tried to argue that there was no nutrition problem in Bihar. He tried to argue that the food insecurity in Bihar was something of the past. So this is just to illustrate how he was disconnected from reality. He also said something that I don't even want to repeat because it was so insulting, about how the families of some communities are more interested in their pigs than in education. So that gives you an idea of where the root of the problem is. I mean, if at the very top, there is no sense of urgency and no recognition of the schooling crisis, then we can't hope that there will be much action. I think that one thing that's very important is to try to somehow unleash the popular demand for education. One point that came out in both Jharkhand and Bihar is that people on their own somehow are not able to be more demanding. They see that the school is not functional, or in the COVID crisis, they saw that the schools were closed, they were angry and sad about it, but they were not protesting, they were not coming on the streets. But when we went to them in some places and tried to mobilize them and explain to them that the schools should be reopened, or that their school should have more than one teacher, because in Jharkhand, 1/3 of the primary schools have a single teacher, then they come out in large numbers and they are quite happy to raise their voices. So I think there's a suppressed demand for quality education that somehow one has to find ways of unleashing. And there's something similar with teachers. The teaching standards, of course, are not very high in many of these schools. But still, in both states, and certainly in Jharkhand, I'm very sure that a large proportion of teachers would still much prefer to work in a functional environment than in the dysfunctional environment that they live with today. So I think it would be very interesting in one or both of these states to try to facilitate the creation of an association of motivated teachers who want the system to function and who are prepared to work for it, because the teachers can have quite an influence as well as potentially the parents. So I think we have to think basically of ways of shaping the system, including also, as we tried to argue with the minister, putting in place much stronger grievance redressal facilities so that parents have a chance to voice their complaints and to demand a response. So these are the kinds of things that I think one has to start with. And then, of course, when you come to the details, the facilities, the toilets, the midday meals, the curriculum, and so on and so forth, there are many more detailed suggestions one can make. But I think the first step is to somehow end this silence and apathy that surrounds the schooling system in both states. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. I would like to invite Dr. Vikas Vidyarthi. Yes, sir. Dr. Vidyarthi, if you could once speak.
Yes. Should I start?
You can start.
Yeah. Kindly skip on 3. Slide third. Yes. I start my presentation with a circular or letter of Principal Secretary, Education Department, Government of Bihar, issued in 2018, which says that officials department visited number of schools and found that average attendance of the students was only 28%. It was already accepted by the Government of Bihar, higher level officials. Therefore, in another letter in 2019, same authority says that a good number of schools are running under the open sky, under the tree, in temple, community hall, and have dilapidated condition. Now slide 5 says that recently estimate based on data collected by the Education Department, Government of Bihar, on July 2023, only 1.23% schools reported about 75% attendance of students. On August 18, only 17.42 schools reported about 70% attendance of the students recently. Slide 6 says that total number of enrollment was 11 million in primary schools, while even decreased up to 1.2 million enrolled in students in higher secondary education during this journey. 90% students do not complete their secondary education in Bihar, hinted huge dropouts. Slide 7 says that average 72% schools have adverse pupil-teacher ratio and only 50% teachers of the total strength are working. State of Bihar needs still 0.4 million teachers, 4 lakh teachers. Slide 8. In a study conducted by me, data collected from the 109 sampled schools of South Bihar, I found that average 27% students were physically present in sampled school. Surprisingly, attendance at secondary level was only 4%. 20% in high school, 36% attendance was in upper primary, and average 41% students were present in primary schools. Slide 9. Please skip on slide 9. It was also found that students whosoever attending the schools generally belong from very poor family. Slide 10. If we see the physical presence of students in the sampled schools, we found that sheer percentage of girls student is more than that of boys up to 10th standard, and after that it has been decreased. There are many reasons. Slide 11. If we enrollment in the sampled school, we found that sheer percentage of girls student is more than that of boys students up to 8th standard. In high school, ratio is almost same 50-50, and after that it has been again decreased in secondary. Slide. When we see the guardian occupation of students whosoever coming in government schools in Bihar, we collected from 700 students during the survey December 2018. We found that 32% were belong from marginal farmers, 50% belong from casual laborers, 10% belong from small shopkeepers, 6% belong from skilled laborers, 2% belong from government job but on contract. 15. It was also experienced that a good number of students who are going to private school but receiving education incentive funds from the government school and utilizing the same fund for fees purposes in private school. It was also experienced that stakeholders of the government schools like clerks and teachers don't want to run the government properly due to vested interest in private schools. Slide 16 says that a good number of students, mostly primary school students, were unable to open the Aadhaar seeded bank account, resulted deprivation from education incentive schemes, scholarship, dress, napkin. Bank officials don't want to open bank account of the students. The slide also says that a good number of management committee and Vidyalaya Shiksha were not functioning properly. It was also experienced that needs radical or a structural change in school management committee and Bihar Vidyalaya Shiksha Samiti. Slide 17, we found that lands of the good number of schools are encroached, needs updation and possession of land. It was also observed that a good number of funds are lying in a school bank account for last many years. There were no audit procedures. We also found that there are no clerical staffs to maintain the records and midday meal also. So HM in charge or some of the teachers were badly engaged in record management or MDM, which has an impact on teaching learning process in schools. Slide 18 says that a good number of schools were shut down or locked in daytime. Slide 18, in daytime are some of the schools in the district of Shekhpura, Lakhisarai and other district also. Slide 19, a good number of secondary and higher secondary schools become adda or base for admission and examination like Saswana High School, Shekhpura or Dumrama High School, Nevada. Slide 21, there are two letters pasted on slide 21. Letter which left one says that Chief Minister of Bihar instructed concerned official to plan a survey on implementation of Section 12(1)(c) of the Right to Education Act 2019, under which private unaided institutions and a special category schools shall provide free and compulsory education to at least 25% children belonging to disadvantaged groups and weaker section admitted to class 1 or pre-primary classes. Such schools would be entitled to reimburse at the per child cost incurred by the government. In 2022-23, recently, government of Bihar released 72 lakhs or 0.72 million to reimburse the private unaided educational institutions in Bihar. To comply the Chief Minister order, concerned officials sent a request letter to 5 educational institutions in Patna to plan a survey on Right to Education Act. Proposal was submitted by Sinha Institute and others, maybe, but there were no further development. But recently, information sought under RTI, Right to Information Act, in July 2023, revealed that Bihar Education Project Council constituted 5 members committee, later which can be seen on right side at slide 21, to know the implementation of 12(1)(c) of RTE Act in Bihar, but we don't have a report on the same nor any model in Bihar. Slide 22 also says that there is gap in intake capacity and actual enrollment under Right to Education Act 12(1)(c) in Bihar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vikas, for your comments. I will now invite Ashish ji to speak.
Guru, I'd request Jaimanti to speak first. I'll follow her.
Okay, fine. That is
Jaimanti,
quite fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you put your mic on? Jaimanti, आप अपना mic on कर लें और बात करें. जयमंती, अगर
जयमंती जी,
आपको
आपका म्यूट, हाँ आपका अभी वापस म्यूट हो गया, अनम्यूट करिए. हाँ, अभी बोलिए, सुन रहा है.
सभी को जिंदा।
बोलिए आप, सुन रहे हैं, आपका आवाज सुन रहा है,
हम बोल रहे
सुन रहे हैं हम।
हैं, मैं पूरा हिंदी में बोलूंगी। तो स्कूली जो बच्चे हैं, जो हमारे सर्वे का, तो उसमें स्कूल में टीचर और जो स्थान से बहुत सारे कमियां हैं। विषय के अनुसार देखा जाता है, बहुत सारे चीजें माना जाए कि उसको स्कूल को एग्जाम सेंटर के रूप में बिहार में देखा जा रहा है, क्योंकि हम इस पे सरकारी से ही पढ़ाई किए हैं और पूरी दिक्कत से हम लोग की पढ़ाई हुई है। दूसरा चीज की सरकारी स्कूल जो होती है तो वो दलित बहुजन समाज के आसपास में होते हैं, तो उस स्कूल में दलित और बहुजन के ही बच्चे ज्यादातर पढ़ते हैं। हमारे ग्रंथ में भी है कि बच्चे अगर शूद्र पढ़ ले तो
आशीष जी, आपको सही सुनाई दे रही है? बिकॉज आई एम गेटिंग वेरी।
नहीं जयमंती, तुम्हारी आवाज नहीं आ रही है। जयमंती, थोड़ी आवाज को ठीक कर लो तो। और फिर तो जयमंती अपने गांव से बात कर रही है, कटिहार में सिक्किम।
हाँ, नेटवर्क का ही सवाल है, नेटवर्क का इश्यू है।
नेटवर्क का इशू है। कल नहीं था, कल जब टेस्टिंग हुई थी तो उसकी आवाज ठीक आ रही थी। यहाँ बहुत बारिश हो रही है, शायद उसकी वजह से भी।
जयमंती जी बोलिए, अगर आपका कनेक्टिविटी अगर खराब है तो आशीष जी बोल सकते हैं, फिर आप दोबारा ट्राई कर सकती हैं, लेकिन आप बोलिए।
ठीक है, मैं बात रख देता हूँ, शायद जयमंती की आवाज दिक्कत हो रही है। तो सबसे पहले तो धन्यवाद कि हम लोग इस विषय पर चर्चा कर रहे हैं। जैसा कि जॉन ने कहा है कि इस एक भयावह स्थिति है स्कूल को लेकर, और जिसपे पूरा समाज एक तरह से चुप है, और उसने एक अलग रास्ता निकाल लिया है। जिनके पास संसाधन है वो ट्यूशन सेंटर या प्राइवेट स्कूल्स में जा रहे हैं, और ये सबके जहन में है, सबके नज़र में भी है, ऐसी कोई बात छुपी हुई नहीं है। अगर आप शहर में भी रहते हो तो यदा कदा आपको एक प्राइवेट एक सरकारी स्कूल नज़र आ जाएगा, उसके इर्द गिर्द चारों तरफ प्राइवेट स्कूलों की भरमार होती है। ये हम लोग सभी देख रहे हैं। गांव में स्थिति और भी बदतर है, जैसा कि जयमंती इशारा कर रही थी कि दलित बहुजन के बच्चे ही मुख्यतः यहाँ जा रहे हैं। और डॉक्टर विकास विद्यार्थी का जो उन्होंने डेटा प्रेजेंट किया, उसमें भी साफ है कि 50% जो बच्चे हैं वो ऐसे श्रमिकों के बच्चे हैं, मजदूरों के बच्चे हैं, जिनके बीच हमारा यूनियन काम करता है। तो जाहिर है कि एक ऐसे तबके के लिए एक स्कूल चल रहा है जिसकी अपनी आवाज़ नहीं है। और ये मुझे लगता है एक बहुत बड़ा कारण है कि सरकारें इतनी बदहाली वाली व्यवस्था को ठीक करने के लिए कोई उनके पास कोई अर्जेंसी नहीं दिख रही है। जैसा कि जॉन ने कहा, हमारी बैठक भी हुई थी शिक्षा मंत्री के साथ, तो सभी असहाय ही लग रहे थे। लग रहा था कि ये बियॉन्ड रिपेयर सिस्टम है, और शायद समाज ही दोषी है इस बात का कि बच्चे स्कूल नहीं जा रहे हैं। मेरा अपना मानना है, और ये सभी का मानना होगा मेरे ख्याल से, कि बच्चे सीखना चाहते हैं और अभिभावक जो हैं उन्हें सिखाना चाहते हैं। और अगर शिक्षा स्कूलों में मिले, अच्छी शिक्षा मिलने लगे, बच्चे पढ़ने लगे, तो वापस ये जो हम 20% का आंकड़ा बोल रहे हैं कि 20% ही बच्चे आ रहे हैं, वो वापस बहुत जल्दी से जंप कर जाएगा। अनफॉर्चुनेटली अभी जो बातचीत चल रही है स्कूल के अराउंड, वो बातचीत शिक्षक भर्ती से चल रही है, और वो एम्प्लॉयमेंट की के नज़रिए से हो रही है। अभी जो सारा डिस्कोर्स आप देखेंगे कि हाँ 4 लाख शिक्षकों की बहाली होनी है, उसमें से बहाली प्रक्रिया शुरू हो गई है, हाल ही में एग्जाम भी हुआ है, लेकिन ये दृष्टिकोण इस तरह से हो रहा है कि ये नौकरी लग रही है। नौकरी कहाँ लग रही है, उस व्यवस्था का क्या हाल है जहाँ शिक्षकों की नौकरी हो रही है, इस पे कोई बातचीत अभी तक हुई नहीं है और मुझे लगता है कि ये बहुत ही दुर्भाग्यपूर्ण है। मैं आपको बताऊं कि कुछ डेटा जो यहाँ प्रेजेंट नहीं किया गया, जैसे कि कई सारे स्कूल हैं जिनमें सिर्फ एक शिक्षक हैं और अररिया ब्लॉक में ही हमने पाया, और ये उनका जो इंफॉर्मेशन सिस्टम है आप उसी से देख सकते हैं कि करीब 20 स्कूल, प्राइमरी स्कूल ऐसे हैं जो सिर्फ जिसमें एक शिक्षक आपको मिलेंगे। तो अगर एक शिक्षक से स्कूल चल सकता, मुझे नहीं लगता है कि कोई भी स्कूल एक शिक्षक से चल पाएगा। उसी तरह अगर आप आंकड़ा देखें तो औसतन प्राइमरी स्कूल में 4 शिक्षक हैं और अपर प्राइमरी जिसको हम मध्य विद्यालय कहते हैं उसमें 8 शिक्षक हैं। अगर आप देखें कि कोई भी शिक्षक अगर एब्सेंट है, उस दिन स्कूल नहीं आए हैं, तो कोई ना कोई क्लास जरूर बाधित होगा। प्राइमरी स्कूल तो एक क्लास नहीं होगा हर समय, और सेकेंडरी स्कूल में भी कोई ना कोई क्लास जरूर बाधित होगा। मोटा मोटा शिक्षकों की बहाली को ले ले या बाउंड्रीज और जो पानी की व्यवस्था, बिजली की व्यवस्था, स्टडी किया जाए इसके कारणों को कि बच्चे स्कूल क्यों नहीं जा रहे हैं, तो सबसे बड़ा कारण यही होगा कि उन्हें नहीं लगता है कि स्कूल जाने के बाद वो कुछ शिक्षा ग्रहण कर पा रहे हैं। और अगर आप ग्रामीणों से बात कीजिएगा तो उनका भी यही मानना है, लेकिन उनकी आवाज थोड़ी दूसरे ढंग से निकलती है। खासकर जो थोड़े संपन्न है वो कहेंगे कि बिहार के स्कूलों को सिर्फ खिचड़ी खिलाने का स्कूल बना दिया गया है, और वो इस बात को एक्नॉलेज नहीं करना चाहते हैं कि कम से कम मध्याह्न भोजन के वजह से 20% बच्चे का भी अटेंडेंस है, उसमें मध्याह्न भोजन का बहुत कंट्रीब्यूशन है। वो इस बात को एक्नॉलेज भी नहीं करना चाहते, गलत समझदारी होगी। मुझे लगता है कि इस समस्या का हल क्या है, तो जैसा कि जॉन ने कहा कि एक चित्कार समाज के तरफ से निकलनी चाहिए और वो नहीं निकल रही है, और उसका भी कारण मैंने पहले भी कहा कि उसका एक कारण यह है, बच्चे वहां जा रहे हैं, उसकी आवाज हमारे समाज में बहुत कमजोर है। तो ये इसके चलते ये मसला और भी गंभीर और जटिल हो जाता है कि कैसे ये इसका समाधान निकलेगा। लेकिन जो भी हो, मुझे लगता है कि अगर इस पे हम लोग लगातार बातचीत करें, लगातार इस मामले को उठाएं अपने अपनी तरह से, तो कुछ ना कुछ बेहतरी के लिए हम बढ़ सकेंगे। हाथ उठ चुका है शाहिद भाई का, तो मैं और बातें नहीं रखूंगा। मैं फिर से जयमंती की अगर आवाज
आप अभी म्यूट में हैं, आप थोड़ा माइक, हाँ बोलिए।
कि कम ही उम्र में लड़की का घर संभालने का काम मिल जाता है, कम ही उम्र में लड़का को घर की जिम्मेदारियां संभालना पड़ जाता है, और सरकारी में ठीक तरह से अगर शिक्षा नहीं मिल रहे हैं, लाइब्रेरी सिस्टम नहीं है, तो उनका जो है पैसा ट्यूशन फीस में भी ज्यादातर लगते हैं। इस कारण से स्कूल में नहीं हो पाते हैं। और एक चीज जो देखा गया सर्वे के लिस्ट में कि आप शौचालय पे कोई चर्चा नहीं होती। शौचालय अगर स्कूल के तो टॉयलेट जो सिर्फ मात्र टीचर नहीं इस्तेमाल करते हैं, वो के लिए नहीं होते हैं। अगर बच्चे से बात किया जाए इस बारे में तो बोलते हैं कि बच्चे गंदगी कर देते हैं, उनकी आदतें नहीं है कि शौचालय में, तो सिर्फ नाम के टॉयलेट बना होता है स्कूलों में।
May I speak something?
जयमंती, तुम्हारी आवाज नहीं आ रही है।
हेलो हेलो,
हाँ
आ रही है आवाज?
हाँ अब आ रही है। इसी स्थिति में बोलो। फिर चली गई आवाज जयमंती, फिर चली गई। ठीक है, तुम्हारी आवाज हम लोग नहीं सुन पाएंगे आज। हम लोग आगे बढ़ सकते हैं, उससे बढ़ने से पहले बस एक और पॉइंट रख देता हूँ, बस एक और मैं बिंदु रख देता हूँ कि ये इंटरेस्टिंग होगा देखना कि ये सर्वे जो हुआ है वो सीमांचल के इलाके में हुआ है, और सीमांचल का इलाका एक तरह से सबसे पिछड़ा हुआ है बिहार का, तो वो भी एक बात है। मुझे लगता है कि हमने रिकमेंड भी किया था जब मंत्री से हम लोग मिले थे और विभाग को भी कि एक इंडिपेंडेंट स्टडी कराई जाए जिससे पता लगे कि भाई इतना कम अटेंडेंस क्यों है। वो हम फिर आज इस फोरम से उस मांग को दोहराते हैं। धन्यवाद।
धन्यवाद आशीष। मुझे लगता है कि शाहिद हुसैन जी ने अपना हैंड रेज किया है। शाहिद जी, आप संक्षेप में अपनी बात रख सकते हैं।
मैं कुछ बोल सकता हूँ?
शाहिद जी, सजेशन आया है कि आप जो क्वेश्चन आंसर सेशन होगा उसमें अपनी बात रखिएगा। हमारे एक स्पीकर और रहते हैं तो हम उन पर मूव करेंगे। Dr. Sajitha Bashir, I would like to invite you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I will just start while the presentation is coming up. I would like to congratulate Jan Jagran Shakti Sangathan and the authors of the report. One can't say that one feels happy that you know, we have a report like this, but one can congratulate people for bringing out the really dire situation in Bihar. Why don't I feel happy about it? Of course, nobody does. But, you know, early 90s, when we were designing a district primary education program, there was actually a lot of optimism, especially optimism emanating from Bihar, surprisingly, about the mass movement, the mass mobilization of people, of innovations in teaching that were often incorporated into the DPEP program and then shared across states. And 30 years later, we're seeing that the situation is even worse than in the 90s, at least as far as public education system is concerned. So it's deeply saddening for me personally, but also, as Jean has said and others have said, it's a true tragedy for Bihar as a state. So let me just complement with a few additional statistics from secondary surveys, which broadly reinforce what has been said both in the report as well as by Dr. Vidyarthi. So the first is, next slide, please, is that even before the pandemic, according to the ASER, you know, the learning assessment, rapid learning assessment surveys, we find that even before the pandemic, 50% of standard 3 children in rural areas could not read a word, one single word. We're not talking of a text, a sentence, or anything. And Bihar had one of the highest. I mean, the prize was taken by Madhya Pradesh, but Bihar is very close behind. You can compare that with Kerala at the other end, which is, you know, 10% could not read a word. Now, this is not a grade 3 text or a grade 2 text. It's just whether you can read a single word. Next slide, please. During the pandemic, according to the ASER survey of 2021, 30% of rural children in Bihar reported absolutely no learning. When we say no learning, it means nothing, absolutely no contact with the teacher, no contact with the school. Forget about online learning or remote learning of any kind. And since this was a phone survey, this is probably a great underestimate. I mean, so hardly surprising, by 2022, when the survey was done of rural children again, 70% of rural grade 3 children could not read a single word. So just think about it, you know, in these 2 years, when schools were closed, you have grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 at least, who don't have any kind of learning, any kind of basic literacy, and this cohort is going to pass through the whole system and come out essentially illiterate, right, at the end of this. Next slide, please. Now, when we look at the distribution of school enrollment across different types of school management, this is based on the National Sample Survey of 2017-18. You see that the poorest children, that's the bar on the left, they attend mainly government schools. And when you look at the top 20% households, the bar on the column on the right, you see that over half of them are attending the private unaided schools, the private schools. So there's already a clear demarcation about who these, who's being served by these government schools, which other panelists have also mentioned. So when these government schools do not function, it is basically the poor of Bihar, the bottom 40% at least, and maybe the bottom 60% who are not getting any education. Next slide, please. And this data is about, children who are availing of private tuition, as mentioned in the National Sample Survey. I was doing this analysis for Kerala and Tamil Nadu because in Kerala, we always like to say we are so much better than Bihar. So, of course, we are, but given the situation in Bihar, that's not very difficult standard to achieve. But what struck me was the percentage of children who are reporting private tuition, 2017-18, that this proportion is far higher in Bihar, which is a much poorer state, than Kerala or Tamil Nadu. And that is true even at the primary level and goes up to the higher secondary level where half the children are reporting having tuition. And it's also true in government schools and in private unaided schools and so on. So there is something that is fundamentally wrong. And I'm sure this private tuition is not the same as what you have reported because we don't know how the question was phrased, but what this shows is that the majority of the children in Bihar, including from amongst the poor and those attending the government schools, actually think that they have to supplement. Well, I mean, here it says 40%, 39% of children in government schools, but as you have shown, this is probably much higher. Okay, next slide. So I want to conclude this because, we want to open it up for more discussion, that the situation is shocking, deeply saddening compared to what was the situation 30 years ago. But as Jean has said, what is really more shocking is that there is no public outcry. As various people have said, everybody knows it, whether they're data or not, studies or not. This is the lived experience also. But what we see is that there is no public outcry. The poor themselves are abandoning public educations. Schools are really just for, registration and then a means to sit in the public exams if you get a chance. There's an elite consensus that education for the poor is not a priority and kuch kar liya hai, we've provided some kind of schools and that's good enough. What's equally striking is the absolute failure of political parties to take up the education crisis in Bihar as a matter of legitimate political concern. And I don't understand the reason, and it would be good to know why that is the case, and even also to really check what are they saying about education in the coming elections, for instance. There is an inability of people to articulate their demands with respect to education, to demand accountability from teachers and from the state. And in my view, this is partly because people don't have a picture, a mental picture of what is good education. They don't see what is going on in the better off schools. They don't see, that what they're getting in the coaching centers is also nothing very great. They don't have a picture of what is happening in Kerala, for instance, where at least, the schools have everything. And this was this was a state which had nothing 50, 60 years ago, also compared to a very similar situation to Bihar. And there is a diversion of attention from the education crisis on all kinds of divisive issues, caste, community, mainly religious kind of hatred that is being fostered. And there's a superficial techno-solutionism, use of learning apps, personalized adaptive learning. I saw that Rajasthan and Andhra Pradesh are introducing these kinds of programs without addressing the fundamental issues of teachers, teacher training, and accountability, as if by bringing in some kind of software or computer system, you can somehow have a magic bullet, which is, again, another kind of fooling of the people. So there's one more point I want to make here before closing, which is, I think as I was listening to the talks, and I was thinking of what we were doing in the early 1990s. One thing that has really changed is that in the early 1990s, there was a lot of international pressure on India, that India had the largest out-of-school population, that numbers were alarming and extremely demeaning for India, in international forums. And that's part of the reason that DPP and Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and so on subsequently were launched. Today, there is really no international pressure. In a way, India is seen as having made a lot of advances. So one question I had is, how do we use this kind of report to bring to the attention of also international funding organizations about the reality on the ground? In fact, I was just looking up that the World Bank had a teacher...
Sajitha, 1 minute more. Sorry, a minute more, yeah.
Yeah, teacher effectiveness project in 2015, $150 million project. And it's supposed to have addressed things like teacher attendance and teacher training and so on. What really were the results of that project, and have the findings of this kind of study and the analysis of the secondary surveys actually been brought into the awareness of these international funding organizations also? So I really want to say that I think it's an excellent study, but we need to think what we can do with this going forward. So thanks a lot. Over to you, Guru.
Thank you very much for those questions. I think that provides a good basis for us to get into the next session, which is really an open session for people who are in the who have been attending and listening to the speakers. You can unmute and speak. I think Dr. Shahiji wanted to speak first. You can type. You can click on the raise hand icon on the bottom right, and I will call on people one by one to ask their questions. Or if you have a comment, you can make a brief comment as well. Those who have been typing in the chat window, it may be a good occasion for you to speak about your point so that others can hear. I think everybody's not been watching the chat window. So we'll start with Shahi, then I request others also to raise their issues, questions, and then we'll have a round of the panelists responding to it, and then we'll wind up. Yeah, Shahi ji, aap bolna chahenge? I think he's having a problem with his mobile. He's not on the call. But anybody else would like to speak, and then we can go back to him. Anybody else would like to ask a question or make a comment? Aishwarya, would you like to speak out your point? You have typed in the chat window, or maybe I can read it out for you. So Aishwarya Sharma is asking the question. I wanted to ask if the government school students only opted for individual local tutors and tuition centers, or were they also accessing edtech platforms? Whether the private coaching, tuitions, whatever was happening, did that have any element of edtech is one question. Mohammad Yassin is asking a question. What is the monitoring framework in Bihar? If this is a situation of the schools in terms of infrastructure, in terms of teachers, vacancies, teaching not happening, attendance being very poor, what is the monitoring framework in Bihar? Of course, the study focused primarily on schools, and therefore some of these questions may not have been, answers to these questions may not have been identified in the study itself, but I'm sure the panelists will have, from their experience, prior experience, also be able to throw some light on these issues. Yeah, there is another question from Abansal. What is the quality of teacher training? And I would connect one more question to that. We all know that Bihar had probably the largest number of para teachers in schools, untrained and not qualified teachers. And I think recently they had a very massive system of teacher certification through IGNO. And I think all teachers have become permanent teachers now, unlike what was the situation 2 or 3 years back. And therefore, the question also was, and this is something somebody had asked in the YouTube, does it have an impact in terms of teachers' salaries? Is it that as para teachers, they might have been poorly paid, but now as regular teachers, are they getting pay which is commensurate with what other government school teachers in other states are getting? And then what is the impact in terms of teaching quality, given that they're getting very good salaries? So these are some of the questions. Would anybody else like to also raise a question? People are typing the chat window, but anybody else has any other questions? You can unmute and speak if you want. Does anybody have any other question? Yeah, Binay, would you go ahead? Please go ahead. Binay Patnaik, you can unmute and speak.
Yeah. This is
go ahead.
Vinay.
We can hear you.
Yeah. Yes. So just to share one of my observation, when I was teaching in Samastipur, I was there for more than 5 years. So few students who were from poor families, but somehow some were engaged in delivering newspapers, some working in some other menial kind of job. But one craze that they had is following some kind of EdTech platform, and one student that I knew, with his money which he could save from selling newspapers, bought a tab, and so that he can attend classes on there are many EdTech platforms that he could subscribe to. So with this poor education available in schools, maybe not for all, but for some, EdTech platforms are luring students. Thank you, Guru.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure the panelists will have some responses to that. Mitra Ranjanji, would you like to unmute and ask your question or make your comment? Mitra Ranjanji from the RT forum, would you like to unmute and speak, sir? You joined an audio only mode, so you won't be able to speak. I can raise your question. Does anybody else have any other question? There's also a question on, is there any law regulating educational apps in India? Although I think the study did not necessarily say something about EdTech being used in the coaching centers or at homes or in the schools itself, but that's an independent question, whether there is any law governing EdTech use of apps in India. Are there any other questions, or we can request the panelists to speak and then we can come back? There are several points that have been raised in terms of teacher training, monitoring of schools, teacher salaries and qualifications, use of EdTech, and these are some of the questions that have been asked. I request maybe the panelists can respond, and maybe Paran, if there are other points that you wanted to raise which you didn't raise in the beginning, you can talk about them now. We'll start with Paran and go in the same order that we had in the original list of speakers. So Paran, can you go ahead and respond to some of these questions?
From what I understand, one of the monitoring frameworks is the DCF form that the teacher fills in at the end of their academic year. And in this form, they put in all information about their school. And this is the form that is then translated into data and uploaded on the UDI's website. So the teachers do put in what are the infrastructural requirements in their school, what are the TTR levels in their school. So these are aspects that the teachers are filing in, although they are self-filled forms, so that teachers might be over-reporting or under-reporting certain aspects. But this is one monitoring system that I am aware of. Another aspect that has changed this particular year in Bihar has been that until now, so this is already there in Jharkhand, that teachers have a biometric attendance which is used in Jharkhand, and I think Piramal Foundation is kind of helping them in setting up the tech background for this. The same thing has started in Bihar from this academic year onwards, possibly because the government itself was quite aware about teacher absenteeism in the prominent teacher absenteeism in Bihar. But my personal understanding is that that grievance redressal is not there, and even if there are certain teachers who want to complain about the kind of corruption that is going on in the system, then their voices are quietened. They are made to feel scared, and so that feedback system, I believe, to large extent does not exist. I would like to pass on I think that's it from my side, and there was nothing more that I wanted to add with regards to the presentation. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm not qualified to answer most of the questions since I don't live in Bihar and I was not really actively involved in the survey. I want to react a little bit to what Sajitha was saying about the system being worse than 30 years ago. I don't think the system is generally worse. I think a lot of things have improved. I mean, if you look at the state of the Bihar schooling system as we found it at the time of the probe survey in the 1990s, it was even worse in many, many ways. I mean, many schools had no buildings. If you look at school participation rates, they have improved, literacy rates have improved, facilities, midday meals have been introduced, and so on and so forth. So I think there have been a lot of significant improvements. Also bearing in mind that the school is not just about learning. I mean, I think we all know that. It's also a place where children grow up. And the schools in Bihar and Jharkhand, even if they are not very good, I think are still a very much better growing environment for children than these dingy, low-cost coaching centers where they go some of the rest of the time. And I think that environment has improved. What has not improved is the classroom activity levels and the levels of learning. I think that is quite clear, and as we are discovering now, at least for Bihar, the school attendance rates. But then the other point is that Bihar is not India. I mean, there are many other states we have seen significant improvements. So I think that was a slightly too pessimistic statement. But of course, there is a crisis now, especially in the post-COVID period, and we have to say that very clearly. I think there was a very good question about monitoring system, and in reaction to that, someone, I think Pushpa, said that the monitoring system has basically disappeared now in Bihar because the BRCs and CRCs are not working. I think if that is true, that is really a serious issue. I mean, no schooling system can function well without some sort of monitoring system. In Jharkhand, I think the BRCs and CRCs are still there, but the monitoring, such as it is mainly record keeping. I mean, it's checking the records and nothing more than that. So I think monitoring system is something that needs to be looked at and addressed. And we did mention that in our conversation with the on the 4th of August. But again, there was not much urgency on this part. So, yeah, I think these are the main points I wanted to respond to.
Yeah, thank you. One more point I just wanted to make before I request Dr. Vikas to speak is also because he's a part of the Sinha Institute. The fact is that the poor quality of education is also connected to the fact that resource or budgetary possibilities in Bihar are much lesser, and Bihar government has been requesting for a special package for Bihar from the government of India for a very long time, and it was also an election promise, I think, at in one of the earlier elections. And without that additional budgetary support, just expecting the state government to mobilize funds when industry, there is not much in terms of agriculture, taxation is not possible. There is no service sector, so to say. The overall fundraising abilities is very limited, and therefore the ability of the system to fund infrastructure or fund teachers beyond the very minimal that seems to be necessary to do. That is what we seem to be seeing. So Dr. Vikas, would you go ahead, respond to some of the questions that have been asked and the comments that have been made? I think Dr. Vikas is not there on the chat right now. Ashish ji, would you like to go ahead and respond?
So in response to the question pertaining to the monitoring system, I feel recently there has been a lot of chatter about that. And mostly the approach is high-handedness, bureaucratic approach. BDOs and other officials have been instructed to visit schools, and there is a proposal of there is an order, in fact, I think, if I'm not wrong, that they will also teach a classroom when they visit the school. So there is some concern. There is an acknowledgement by the government about the low attendance, and there are some measures to that effect. That is one, I would say. And of course the BRC and CRCs are there, mostly not doing the work they're supposed to, I believe, but then they are not here to state their majburis, you can say, why they are not able to function well. That is one. The other question was regarding the emoluments, the salary of the teachers. So the salary of teachers has increased over the years, and that is not a result of their qualifying any test. That's the result of the strong union they have, and they have continuously fought for their the salaries and other benefits, and that is why they are sort of not permanent, I would say, but they are sort of permanent employees of the state, not full-fledged employees. And this thing about test, their qualifying an exam and all, that has happened, but I'm not sure about the quality of those exams and how teachers have passed those exams. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, thank you for that response. Dr. Vikas Vidyarthi, would you like to respond? We can see you now, so you can speak now. We are unable to hear you. We can see that you are speaking. You're on mute. Can you unmute and speak? Yeah, we can't hear you. I think the same problem that you had in the beginning probably is recurring, but we could hear you when you were presenting. We are still unable to hear you. Amit, can you just help him? We can maybe go to Dr. Sajitha Bashir and then come back to Dr. Vidyarthi Vikas.
Okay, thanks. I think on the question of monitoring, Paran mentioned that the teachers upload data in the data capture format, and then it goes into UDICE. So I looked at the UDICE data, decided not to present it because almost all of it is just contradicting what we know from this report, in the sense that it seems to convey that 90% of the schools have infrastructure and so on and so on. So there's a lot of data that the UDICE has, which perhaps needs to be cross-checked. So I think, the monitoring system in Bihar is not working like just anything else also. And UDICE overall seems to not be a very reliable source. But these are things that we need to really investigate and expose. On the question of teacher training, I mean, I don't know of any study that has been done on the quality of teacher training in Bihar, but I think one should look at this World Bank project on teacher effectiveness and perhaps see if there are any studies that were done on that to highlight the results. But maybe just responding to Jean's comments, yes, it's true. I felt very pessimistic. Maybe things aren't, one should not feel so pessimistic. Yet I think, you know, if 70% of kids cannot read a word, even if they're so-called in school, I mean, you know, then what exactly are they doing? Of course, learning is not the only thing. If they get food, if they have the socialization, that's also a good thing. And if they get into a habit of coming to school, that's also a good thing. But then, you know, only 20% are actually attending that school. So I think this exit from the state, right? It's common across India in many ways. You even see it in Kerala, but it seems to be there in Bihar. And I would say that's a phenomenon that has to be understood. At least for me, I don't understand it fully, why people completely abandon the public system. Over to you, Guru.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vikas Vidyarthi is talking again. Can you try now? No, we are unable to hear him. I think there is some device issue. Amit, were you able to help him?
No, currently he is struggling. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, now we can hear.
We can hear him. Please go ahead. We can hear you now. You can talk on the. No, we are not able to hear him. I think there was some other device he was using, which we could, maybe we could hear him through your phone. We have another 10 more minutes. Would anybody like to speak? We have 5 more minutes. Sorry, the last 5 minutes is for Dr. Sajitha, Bashir to wind up. So we have 5 minutes more for any discussions or questions. There have been several points in the chat again. One was in terms of the BRCs and CRCs. Some of the other states have got the block resource center and cluster resource center where they are teachers only from the schools only. They are deputed into the institutions. Presumably, to the BRCs are supposed to be places where you have the teacher training happening, and the CRCs are supposed to be the place where you have one person who does regular school visits. From the point of view of school support, academic support, I think even in the best of situation, they are not necessarily work like that. Been largely collection points, but in Karnataka, I do know that there are regular visits of BRCs and BRPs and CRPs to the school. Not necessarily supportive or facilitative, but in a very crude sense, maybe it's the monitoring that people think will make sure that the schools are actually functioning. I'm told in the chat window by Pushpaji that BRC, CRCs were stopped in Bihar, and there is no plan to bring them back. I know Bihar has diets, that every district has a diet, but these diets are also not in a good condition. And maybe some of these support institutions actually, even if they don't fulfill their envisioned role, which is to provide real support to teachers, but at least their presence allows some kind of oversight over the schools, in the absence of which the schools seem to have very little accountability to even function to keep children in the schools. I think that's one thing regarding BRPs and CRPs I wanted to say. And Mitranjanji is again sharing in the chat that there is a school merger plan in Bihar, and of course that would be terribly catastrophic, because in the primary level, at least, unless there are schools very close to the hamlets, poor families are not going to send their very young children where the overall security can always be a challenge, and particularly girls will not be sent to school. So the school merger will only result in more dropouts from school, real dropouts. Now we have a situation of de facto dropout where students are enrolled but not attending. That would be a real de facto dropout, and that would be worse than the situation that we have now. Kanika ji, would you like to speak? I think you are able to. We wanted you to also share your thoughts. Are you able to speak now? Yeah, can you unmute and speak? Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I just wanted to think about what Jean said in terms of what to do next. There are several problems, and thinking about what to do next will require, coming together of various groups. And I believe Dr. Bashir talked about what kind of pressure do we want to bring in, especially both national, regional, and international pressure. And I think we need to think very carefully about what that means, what that would look like, because the situation is so bad, because everything is not working. There might be a chance of things that have their own agenda doing the work that may or may not be very useful in the long term. So thinking with the community, thinking with organizations like the JJSS, which are very embedded in the community, thinking with the parents, with the students, all of that will have to happen in sort of taking this forward. Of course, a lot of rigorous research. We actually, when we were writing this report also, we kept feeling, I and Paran kept feeling that, oh, we need to do more of this. We need to, find more about DBT. We need to find more about what's actually happening within classrooms in terms of quality of teaching. We need to think more about the work culture. We need to think about what the stark social inequality that this area witnesses. What does that do to how education is given? So I think a lot will need to be thought of very carefully, and that I think is going to be, crucial next steps of designing, ideating, brainstorming together with organizations, with communities, parents, to take this forward, not just, a technocentric solution, what everybody has also been saying, or not just leaving it on the government also, I think, because as Ashish pointed out, it often ends up being a very high-handed approach to fixing things. And we definitely are seeing not so good results of that also. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. Amit, would Dr. Vikas be able to come in for a minute now? You can try. Otherwise, we'll go to the last session, last part.
Yes, Vikas, go ahead. Yes. In terms of monitoring or evaluation, there is no set of structure for evaluation or monitoring of schools in Bihar. Sometimes high-level officials and principal secretary come and they just assign time to time. I think during last 10 years, we evaluated we got three study projects from the government of Bihar and committed the report accordingly. But it is pointed out that there is no follow-up or no action taken after the submission of the report. And now it is we saw that education department officials, some high-level officials have started some monitoring or evaluating the schooling system. Now it is. But this is a temporary system or ad hoc system. In 2008, 9 or 10, as I know that there was an education monitoring cell at Sinha Institute with I think 120 staffs who monitor the school education in all the 38 districts. So I think there should be some structural, there should be a system to evaluate or monitor the education system in Bihar. Thank you, Vidyarthi.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Amit. Jean, would you like to speak?
It's just a minor clarification. I don't think there's any serious disagreement between Sajitha and me on the situation and the extent to which it's improving and still deficient and so on. Just to clarify that this figure about 70% of children in grade 3 in 2022 not knowing anything, we have to read that figure in light of the fact that these were children who basically, practically speaking, never went to school. Because those who were in grade 3 in 2022 were in grade 1 when COVID began, and then they were out of school for 2 years, and then they were bumped up to class 3. So, we have to take that with a pinch of salt. And if you look at the census data on literacy and so on, or even for that matter, the ASER data, I mean, ultimately, most children do learn something at school. I mean, if only to read and write. What the ASER, I mean, even in Bihar, the literacy rate in the age group of 10 to 14 must be around 95% today. And the ASER what the ASER data shows is that many children learn quite late, like for 3-4 years they don't learn very much, but then ultimately they do manage to read and write. So I just wanted to qualify that figure without disputing the general point that Sajitha is making.
Yeah, I'll request Sajitha to make the concluding remarks. But before that, just a very quick, not really a response, but just a loud thinking is, even when we say reading and writing, I think reading and writing itself is a spectrum. You know, just being able to decipher script is at the very lowest levels of reading. And of course, we find that maybe in Bihar, children learn to read basic script by maybe grade 5 or grade 6 instead of grade 1 or 2 elsewhere. But even if they're able to read, you know, within quotes by the time they're in grade 9 or grade 10, the fact that they will not read anything on their own and they will never write anything really, you know, so that quality of reading writing also is something that I'm not disagreeing or saying anything, you know, dramatically different, but I'm saying this is also something that's sad and needs to be kept in account. What is the quality of reading writing ability that the children have got? I'll hand over to Sajitha for the closing remarks.
Yeah, and just to continue that point, I mean, I think that is an issue overall in India. I mean, but I won't go into the details. So just to conclude, first of all, to thank everyone, the authors of the report, the organization that did the survey, all the other panelists also. This is extremely important for us to publicize these kinds of studies. And the National Coalition on Education Emergency has been trying to do that. We tried to do our own studies. We also publicized the Jharkhand one and others, because actually we do feel that the education emergency was not just during the COVID period, it's also continuing. And the reason why you could have that 2 years closure in India, which is one of the longest in the world, is because, you know, education is not given such a priority in politics and in social life, at least education for the poor. So we do want to do additional studies, I think, and additional research. We want to do social mobilization, and we would be very happy to discuss further with the group. I take the point Kanika made that we have to be conscious of the political and social context in which we are operating, and that's absolutely correct. But where is the entry point? What kind of research would be helpful? What helps to mobilize people, make them more conscious? These are things that I think it would be great to discuss, perhaps in a follow-up smaller group, and we can see how we can help with that. So with that, I'd hand it back to you, Guru.
Yeah, I just I don't have anything else to add. I think you already thanked the team that did the study and wrote the report, and I thank all the other panelists who gave their valuable time to the program today. I think this webinar is just to, you know, highlight the extremely what shall I say, unfortunate situation that the children in Bihar are, and I think like Kanika rightly said, it's not something that only the government has to act on. It is something for all of us to act on, and we will take this forward. So thank you everybody, and we look forward to engaging with all of you going forward on both the issues in Bihar as well as in Jharkhand, which was a study that was done by the same team last year. And I think there will be further studies in some of the other states also going forward. And I think there is a need for a national mobilization, and I'm happy that Right to Education Forum, UNICEF, and many other organizations were a part of this call. And I think we need to work together going forward. Thank you all once again. We shall close now.